All right, so we can start talking about, this is in reference to the discussion about the water towers. And as it says on the screen, the President's Commission that I worked with, they talked about, what is a water tower? And it's a great analogy because if you think about it, if you grew up in small town America, like on the plains or whatever, you may have grown up in a little tiny town. At the end of town was the water tower. This great big thing that pretty much everybody could see from every corner of town. And the way to achieve immediate notoriety or fame or to have your passions known was to go up there with a can of spray paint, and like it has in our post, I love Stacy, right on the water tower, and then everybody would know that you love Stacy. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Hey, how are you, man? Are you at work?
Oh no, I'm at home.
Okay. All right.
How are you this morning?
Good. Really good. We're starting to talk about the water towers.
Okay.
And I brought this up because I don't think that I've ever seen it discussed in this manner, and it's something that was discussed frequently when I was with the President's Commission on Critical Infrastructure Protection 20 some odd years ago, and they talked about it in reference to where could somebody hit where it would achieve them status, or that they would get their message out. The example I was just giving when you dinged in was, what if Greenpeace is out there trying to hack infrastructures? Because there are political groups, not necessarily state-sponsored, but they want to bring light to North Korean slave labor or whatever, and they may use that cybersecurity bad guy, the black hat role, to get their word out. It is literally terrorism, if you will, for a political cause. Instead of taking hostages, they take data hostage or whatever. So the idea is that we, as an industry, as a services group, should be aware that there are different levels of desirability for targets. And you may think about, well, this is just, Chris, you were talking about it, this is just a bridge. But what happens if that bridge actually becomes obsolete? What if it, starts to fall apart? What is affected if that bridge goes away? And it takes somebody to actually think about that. And we were talking about water towers, and I gave one while you were still connecting, and I think it's a great place to start. What about Microsoft updates? How broad would that be if you were able to disrupt or insert or otherwise, affect the Microsoft update process in Windows 10? How many billions of computers would be affected within days, maybe hours? Pop stuff up on the screen, like it shows on the Facebook page, I love Stacy. Everybody would know that you love Stacy. So, what do you think in the water towers? David, I loved your example in the transportation industry. I think we could start there. Nationally or international airports. Yeah. And if you remember, many of you, may not remember 20 years ago, may have still been in school or earlier, but before 9/11, security was not that tight in airports, and people could literally walk all the way down the end of the terminal and stand there at the gate while you arrived on your airplane. In other words, they had the opportunity to get within 60 feet of the aircraft without any inspection, without any discussion, without anybody questioning who they were or why they were there. They would just be able to walk down the terminal. And as a result of 9/11 and what they then termed the Global War on Terrorism, or GWOT. If you want to look, Google that, GWOT, the Global War on Terrorism. They stood up the Department of Homeland Security. Didn't exist before then. And they started to institute security protocols and procedures that had never existed before. Now, the closest you can get to, the aircraft is being in the terminal. So if you think about, I'm sorry, not the terminal, the terminal, but not, what's the difference between the two? There's the main concourse area, and then there's the terminals out by the planes, right?
Yeah, they call that the sterile area, where everything that has gone past security has been checked, even if it's got bypassed. So you have your secure area, and then there's also there's a secure area and there's a sterile area. The secure area, every single human being has been vetted. They've got a badge that they have to key in so you know who's gone in, and they got cameras watching all those doors. And then they have the sterile area where everything gets screened. Every human being gets screened for those bad things. So
got it.
There are folks that can get through with a gate pass if they're dropping off unaccompanied minors, but they go through the full screening.
Let me ask a dumb question, and while we're talking about it, this is as good a place to start as any. Are those, and I know the answer to this because I've watched it, are those who are secure considered automatically to be sterile? And what I'm asking is, are those people with badges able to bypass the security?
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are. So
yes,
that's a consideration. Why do you think that occurs? Good talk here. Why do you think that occurs?
There is training. There are background checks. There are all these things that go into effect before they get the badge. And then they, on top of that, you are taught, you understand what the consequences are. So once you've gone through all the training, you've demonstrated your ability to, your trustworthiness, through the background check, through all that, then they say, hey, we're going to trust you to bypass security, but there are still rules. If someone is flying out, they cannot bypass security to get onto an airplane to fly out. They have to go through security. So there are rules in place, but we still have to have people watching those people, just in case, especially with the high turnover and things like that. There, the bad guys are trying to get a job so they can get one of those badges, and I'm sure there's the same thing for the cybersecurity community.
Absolutely.
That you never know what people's motivations are in seeking employment.
Right, and that's why, honestly, I always approach this from what I would call the high road, morally. If you take a look at, and that's why we have the what's it called, the code of ethics here for this group. It basically says, I'm not training people to do something illegal or immoral or unethical. You must tell me that you don't want to be a bad guy. And the point of it being, the exact same training And I'll use the badge as the example. The exact same badge that can be used to let the good guys in can also let the bad guys in. So what you have, you learn this in your physical security class, I'm sure. What are the different controls called for security controls? Do you remember?
Scotty,
go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Chris.
Is one of the detective?
No. I'm talking about the controls fit into a major group, not what the controls actually are. There are what are called physical controls, and those are things like locked doors and gates with barbed wire and locks, combo locks or those sorts of things. Those are called physical security controls. But having a badge which bypasses, literally allows you to bypass that physical security control, is called a administrative or a technical security control. And then the training and the, I'm going to put you in jail for the rest of your known life threat, those are called management controls, and they all fit together, but in the name of operational efficiency, some physical security controls, such as having to go through the security line, are not imposed on certain people that you believe you have to give trust to. Otherwise, what? It's going to take your airline or your flight line workers, the guys with the flashlights or whatever, it's going to take them 45 minutes to get to work because they have to go through the security line. So at what point do you balance those two? And it's always a discussion. But so anyway, that you were talking about it, and I was thinking about my observation that people walk up and go, "Let me in," and the people there with the guns go, "Okay," and they walk right through. It's the same sort of thing with that we have to think about in an infrastructure. There is a significant, and I mean a significant percentage of malicious activity or data destruction, data compromise, data exfiltration that is accomplished by what's known as a trusted insider. The people that you have extended permissions to use their permissions in a negative manner. So the trusted insider is a big deal. Here's an example that I remember. There was a particular person that we were concerned about and was working for our company as a contractor. And that person had been given administrative privileges to do things on the network. And we had reason to believe that this person had done something that was illegal. Like literally, breaking into a system because they wanted to get something that was in that system. And it came to light to the government before it came to light for me as the employer, the manager. And the government pulled me into a room and closed the door and said, "We've got a problem. It looks like," and that was it. "It looks like this has occurred." So we sort of discussed it for about 10, 15 minutes. Are you sure that this, can you verify this? And, could this have occurred some other way? Or, what? Either it was this person with this person's login and password, or it was someone else who had obtained this person's login and password. Both of which were grounds for, corrective action. Yeah, I like that. But in the end, what occurred is this person was, at one of our remote help desks. And I got on the phone and I called the manager in that place and I said, I want you to do me a favor. Stand up right now, walk to this person's cubicle, stand them up, and walk them to the door. Take their badge, disable their accounts, and then we'll talk.
Right.
That was it.
Was this before the days of the multi-factor authentication?
Yeah.
Just needed.
Yeah. Well, here's the sad story of multi-factor authentication for a lot of the federal government agencies. We still have not fully implemented MFA. And there's a reason for it. One is that the authentication has to be user-based. It's called UBA versus machine-based authentication, which is MBA. And it goes back to where does your authentication lie? And MBA, machine-based authentication, cannot be restricted to the person level. Systems can be restricted, but machine-based authentication cannot. Not very easily. And a few years ago, when we had the cyber sprint, 2015, 2016, my particular federal government agency said there's no way we can get to user-based authentication quickly. No way. There are just too many major changes we have to make. So they selected to go with machine-based. And as a result, there are still people that are using user ID and password because the infrastructure will not support the use of their PIV card or and they actually talked about it, a supplemental token other than the PIV card. Because I remember in DoD, in the early 2000s, they went with multi-factor authentication, and everything was user-based, so they could do it very easily. When they did, you had, for example, an unclassified account, and you had a classified account. Well, you couldn't stick your PIV card, and at that time DoD called it a CAC card. You couldn't stick your CAC card into a classified computer because your CAC card in certain situations was writable, which means if you plug it in, that card by definition becomes classified, and you can't put it back in the unclassified systems. So they had to come up with an alternate token approach. And they came out and they issued a second card. It wasn't a CAC card. It was like I don't have it with me, but you know, you have the little chip card on your bank card. It was like that. There were chips on these cards. And they issued you that chip card with the serial number on it was registered to your classified account. And you had to use this one for classified and this one for unclassified. But that's the only way DoD could do it. My federal agency chose not to do that. And so they're requiring, 20-character long passwords for these accounts and stuff. But still, the point is, it's still single factor. Regardless of what the OMB mandated in, late 2015. Everybody has to do this. Okay. But they're still trying to get there. So anyway, yeah, that's the problem you run into with trusted insiders. And therefore, when you're talking about the water tower, there are circumstances in which somebody, for example, might wish to air their grievances against their employer. Did you know that the president's sleeping with his secretary? You do an all-hands message out to everybody as you are being kicked out the door for, having too many parking tickets or something. It occurs. People are disgruntled and say, well, I've got a way to get my point across, or to say, you've hurt me, so I'm going to hurt you back, or whatever. It's always a consideration. And the news points out no amount of background investigations, no amount of polygraphs are going to be totally airtight.
Right, because no one knows what that trigger is going to be that, causes someone to change from the white hat to the black hat.
Right.
No one
All they
knows.
have is indicators.
Right.
Yep. And history. And therefore, there's the whole discussion about what's called red flag. Have you heard of red flag? Okay. A red flag law, and I'll use this as an example. A red flag law is being enacted in a number of states that basically say if your neighbor or your family member or your spouse thinks that you are going to use a weapon and harm someone or yourself, they can raise the red flag. That's the point of it. It's called raise the red flag. And when they do, the state government is empowering the local police stations to confiscate your weapon. Not because you've done something, but because somebody near you says, I don't think he's stable enough, and he could harm himself or harm me or harm the family or whatever. It's called a red flag law, and a lot of states are starting to enact red flag laws. Well, the turnaround of that, it sounds great on paper, but the turnaround of that is you can use a red flag just like you use your trusted insider password to ruin somebody's career. You could say, oh, I think that the CEO could harm himself. And the next thing you know, the CEO is changed.
Mm-hmm.
It may sound absurd, but it can be done that way. So
right.
How much can you do in the way of preparedness? How much can you do in the way of putting systems in place and trying to allow the opportunity of last-minute decisions without injecting total mayhem anyway? What if somebody could, point at somebody in your airport terminal, for example, and say, I saw Bob, walking into work, and he was strapping a six gun on his side, or something like that. That's a red flag. What happens? The police are called, because the police can't, I don't know if you understand, you may know this, David, but the difference between security and police are authorized by the municipality that hired them to temporarily suspend your human rights. Oh, I've got the right to speak. No, you don't. Drag him away. I've got the right for peaceful assembly. No, you don't, and drag you away. To literally suspend your rights, your legally protected rights, the police can remove those in the course of an investigation if they see fit. So, what do? You call the police. You don't call the guys in blue shirts. You don't call your supervisor. No, you call the guys with guns.
Yep.
And
that red flag law is very interesting because you could do something as innocent as post something on Facebook that all it takes is someone to say, you're not clear-headed enough to have what you have, and throw the red flag up. So it pretty much...
Yeah, it's a slippery slope because, there are folks out there doing things, and you'd like to think that the people that are closest to them could try to stop them in some way, but it definitely can, like you say, be weaponized, because if all it takes is someone, regardless of what their motives, to say, hey, point the finger at that guy, and then they come and round the guy up and run through their life, their social media presence, just to find something to verify what that red flag is. It's scary. It's like the movie, what is it? It was a Tom Cruise movie, Minority Report.
I knew you were going there. Yep.
where they were trying to stop people before they did something. You know,
Yep.
of course, there's extra sci-fi to that, but
of course,
but still, I mean, yeah. This is the first I heard about the red flag laws. I mean, what I do is my team does insider threat at the airport. This is why I ended up talking to you,
right,
Scott,
right.
because that's
you
what we
approached
do.
me.
That's all we do.
I
we
was
just
in one of those gray areas, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yep.
You were standing there where people normally don't stand, and you were paying too much attention. And I'm like, okay, at least let me say hi. How you doing? What's going on? Like, yeah.
Yep.
But it is one of those deals where someone has to be paying attention to those, but you can't just give everybody that kind of power to run up a red flag. You know, it would have to be several red flags thrown up within a reasonable amount of time before, you know, they swoop in and start taking people's guns away from them and that sort of thing.
Right.
There has to be something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the and again, I think we're going wide here, you know, discussing this stuff. To get back to cybersecurity, all of this is very valuable, by the way, because you translate that into, you're sitting right there and you're thinking about, who do I trust? Who do they trust? What does that trust imply? What does it get them? And that's something that has to be constantly going through the mind of a service provider. You know, I don't care that we trust each other. I still am not going to give you access. I'm the gatekeeper, and yes, no, it's my decision. So anyway, where was I going? Oh, certificate-based authentication. One of the big certificates that has arrived recently in the last 20 years or so is called PKI, the Public Key Infrastructure. And another description of PKI is a web of trust. If you want to look up that phrase at some point, it's called a web of trust, and it basically means who trusts whom and who do they not trust. And if you are not trusted, not implied trust, but explicit trust, if you're not trusted, then all of the things that you do are not trusted. So what did they have in the PKI? They have what are called certificate authorities, and a CA has to be trusted by other CAs. And the only way they can be trusted is they agree to adhere to a certain set of security protocols and not waver from them. I remember back with DoD, I actually got to look at a CA root workstation for the Department of Defense. Literally. It was in the Pentagon, in the Pentagon Communications Center, you know, where all the message traffic was coming in and out. And it took a badge and an escort to get into that place. Then from within that place, you had to find somebody who had the key, not badge, the key to get you into the locked room in which there were no communication cables whatsoever, and this one workstation sitting in the center of the room that had this stack of cards, had its own little backup tapes and stuff. None of that stuff left the room. And that was the root level certificate authentication, certificate authority workstation for a portion of the DoD. And the reason is nobody could touch it except those people who had passed through multiple layers of security. That was, yeah, like my wife. She said, like me. She was actually a trusted, what's it, TK? I'm sorry? trusted agent, TA, and an RA, a registration agent. I'm sorry, registration authority. That's what RA meant. Yeah, my wife was all of those. You know, she was the person sitting at that workstation at times. So with the DoD, she helped to bring the CAC cards to the DoD, and you know, we've got some real history in this household. But the thing that PKI exists only because of the web of trust, and that is that every CA has to be trusted by a certain number, more than one other CA. And that CA has to, in turn, be trusted by one, or usually it's two or more, other CAs. In other words, all of these CAs agree to do things exactly the same way, and if any one of them doesn't meet the standards, the web is broken and that person is removed from the web. Their certificates, their cards, everything that came from that certificate authority is revoked. It is an active, enabled revocation capability. So you think of PKI. PKI is the bomb, man. It is, you know, if you can do it, it just makes all sorts of sense. But it takes tremendous amounts of infrastructure in order to do it. Yep, and PKI, just so you know, is one of the areas in the Security Plus exam. They talk about PKI and the web of trust. They talk about certificate-based authentication. And by the way, those certificates have to be issued by the certificate authority. You know, if we're talking our servers can generate their own certificates, but those will only go, you know, like to other servers. But if it's going out to, you know, out to the internet or whatever, or let's say from Department of X to Department of Y in the federal government, their locally generated certificates ignored. You know, like I got the certificate from Hackers R Us. So, you know, and if you ever look, and you may have this on your security workstation or whatever, every workstation has a list of trusted certificate authorities. If you've ever seen it, your web browser has a list of trusted authorities. We'll find it when we, you know, over the next week or so. I will find how to actually pull it up on your computer. How do you think your certificates work? They work because somebody issued it and said, if somebody is bearing this certificate, I have verified their identity. So the certificate authority goes on record. And that's why I think everybody remembers when you went to get your PIV card. You had to show photo ID. Well, what's the big deal, you know? Here's my, you know, bank card. No, sorry. And by the way, some photo IDs even weren't acceptable. They had to be a photo ID from a government. You know? The point is, if the person sitting there at the issuance workstation did not grab a photo ID from you, then they are now performing activities. If they've done it once, they could have done it 100 times. They're now performing activities that do not meet the minimum standards of that certificate authority, and that entire certificate authority could have their entire certificate base revoked. And certificate revocation was a dynamic thing. It occurred at a minimum, every 24 hours. So, you know, that's the other part of certificate revocation. It's a monstrous amount. There are more revoked certificates than there are issued certificates. So how do you keep track of them? Because every time you go to authenticate with a certificate, It verifies, number one, is it issued by a certificate authority that is within this trusted web? And then number two, is that certificate on the revocation list? That individual certificate. And there are hundreds of millions of revoked certificates. So it's a big deal. You know, they thought it was going to be simple early on when they came out with PKI. Oh yeah, you and me and Bob. Well, but now there are hundreds of millions of revoked certificates, and you have to check every single one.
Scotty, you can easily create a certificate. The ultimate question in the end is it trusted, correct?
That's right. That's correct. Your workstation has the ability to generate its own certificates. Yes. Your Windows 10 workstation or Mac or whatever, yes, you can generate certificates. But it's nobody's obligation to trust that certificate. You know, what's the phrase? You know, it's good as far as I can throw it. Anyway, so the whole web of trust thing in public key infrastructure is pretty awesome. Okay. Anyway, so water towers. Back to water towers. Sorry, guys. In reference to water towers, what are some other things? I like the Amtrak stations. You can just walk into an Amtrak station. Yeah. Where else? I mean, I thought of Windows updates. Where else? What are other things? You know, if you saw my examples, they used to attack like Target. Then they went to Visa, which is, or Bank of America, which had reach out to hundreds, thousands of other businesses. Now, with the supply chain attacks, they're looking at things like managed service providers. That's what MSP stands for, like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft. What's that?
I was just nodding my head saying, yeah. I mean, if you were talking about the web, like Amazon Web Services, they've got reaches. I hate to say tentacles, but it's a wide range. I mean, all kinds of services and businesses, and it is global. It's not like messing with the local Circle K where their registers go down. You just move on to the next Circle K or next convenience store. If you hit something like Amazon Web Services, there is no telling what that ripple effect is going to be, and what it's going to be for the individual who's going to be, you know, affected.
From a service provider standpoint, that also means you have to measure not only the anticipated benefits of a new system, especially a cloud-based system, but the possible risks of aligning yourself with what somebody else could consider to be a water tower. A particular service that by its very nature and size and reach becomes a desirable target for black hats.
Yeah, I was thinking about the electric cars and things like that. They now have computer systems, and if you can shut that stuff down or affect it in some way, where you'd have, you know, millions of people out there who I've read somewhere, I don't know how true it is, but there were, I think it was Toyotas that were just taken off. You know, the accelerator would just go, or the brakes wouldn't work, and it was, you know, you think about that on a wide scale. It's kind of scary.
Right. The navigation system or the auto driving component. You know, it's one thing to change radio tracks, but it's something entirely different to say turn left. you know. And I remember at least one person took that on as his warning to the auto industry, and my knowledge is very vague of it, but I heard that one guy had, I think it was a Jeep, that he successfully hacked into and was able to manipulate the navigation system, the thing that turned the wheels. And he said, auto industry, listen to me. You've got to have controls. You've got to have more security than you do.
Mm-hmm. That's scary.
Yep.
Here's another one, Scotty. Not necessarily the credit card companies, but the actual processors, the servers. There was an incident a few months ago. It only lasted for a few hours. It was only a blip on the news. Mm-hmm. But for a few hours, if you try to buy McDonald's, your food, the credit card would not go through. And they would go to different McDonald's, and they found out it was happening to all the same McDonald's. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that one of their credit card processors had either an incident or there's something happened to their server, mm-hmm. but nobody could process credit cards whatsoever for a few hours, a few months ago.
Yep. And a lot of people don't really think about it, but you know, the stuff that makes the news is typically the most noteworthy, but maybe not the most destructive. You know, it's got to be something that catches people's attention. Remember that the news is designed to make you click it. Mm-hmm. So they automatically try and make their stories juicier than their neighbor's story. Mm-hmm. You know? And I pointed this out a couple months ago. I actually researched deeply into a story and said, you know, if you look at this and then look at what actually occurred, you can tell they sensationalized it so that people would click it. Otherwise, it's just normal news, and why click here? So you have to remember that these news agencies and these news outlets have an ulterior motive to make something seem interesting enough for you to click on it. And therefore, I pay very close attention to headlines and say, if I see, for example, I go into news.google.com. Every single day I go through news, and I find a particular thing in the technology sector maybe, and it says, well, you know, blah, blah, blah was hacked. And then I go and I expand that because it says see all related to this. And I bring up the whole page. And then you find the same thing being reported by Newsweek and Bloomberg TV and ZDNet and Bleeping Computer. And, you know, you go through and every single headline tells a little bit of a different story. So I go through and I look for what would be the most descriptive, not the most sensational, but the most descriptive headline, and then I go and look into that. For example, XYZ was hacked. What they didn't point out is it was an empty warehouse owned by XYZ. It wasn't XYZ corporate, but of course they didn't say that. They said XYZ was hacked because they wanted you to click on it and go, oh my gosh, my granddaughter's savings are in XYZ or whatever. You know, so just be aware, you can't live on the headlines. The headlines are incomplete and frequently are manipulated in such a way as to make them look more sensational so that you will click them, so that they get increased ad revenue. That's how they make money, off the free things you click, ad revenue. The more people that click on it, the more I can charge my advertisers. So
that, I mean, that's the perfect way for, you know, the water tower. If they know that they can, like Chris was saying about McDonald's, I mean, could you imagine what would happen if, you know, that's the way that it was written, like McDonald's hacked, you know, cash only for this amount of time, and it was this group that did it, you know. And what's so strange to me in the day and age we are is there are people who would cheer that sort of thing, like, hey, you stuck it to McDonald's.
Right.
And then there are people on the other side who's like, you know, that's wrong. And, you know, the fear factor and the cheer factor are probably almost equal nowadays. And the notoriety just grows. You know?
And it shifts. It shifts in an instant. You know, I'm going to get really absurd here, but how many people, you know, were like Bill Cosby's best friends, and then they weren't? Same people, because, you know, new news came out, and the next thing you know, I stopped watching the Cosby Show. Advertising revenue dropped. You know,
I'll give you the Colonial Pipeline recently. When that was attacked, you could take it as, okay, big oil, so what? But people got fearful. People started filling their tanks nationwide, not just the East Coast. And boom, gas went from $2.50 to $3.50 in a matter of weeks. Came back down, but that kind of attack.
Sure. And then there are also influencers. When, you know, what's the phrase when Elon Musk talks? You know, whole financial ecosystems are shifted. Elon Musk started talking about Bitcoin, and Bitcoin jumped 20,000. So, you know, people are influencers as well. So maybe you need to try and convince an influencer, or stay away from that influencer, or whatever. You know, things are I think, and this is just my own thought, one of the things that drives people's actions is, how will my action be perceived? You know, am I doing this because I want them to hurt like I did, or I want them to sympathize with my cause, or I want them to pay, you know, good money because they raised the price of their cheeseburgers, or whatever. It comes down to, is a perceived reaction one of the reasons that prompts an action? And I think the answer to that could be yes. It's all internal, but why would I want to hack Church's Chicken when I could hack McDonald's instead? If I want to make a name for myself, you know, mom and pop's, what was the old one I remember when I was young? Maryland Fried Chicken. Was down in Florida where I lived. Maryland Fried Chicken. I don't even know if they exist anymore. You know, who cares? I don't eat their chicken anyway. But McDonald's, now you're in my home territory. So yeah. Where are the water towers? So be thinking about it, because if you think about it, if you're in a particular industry, let's bring this home because we're almost out of time. If you're in a particular industry or service or business sector that could achieve the status of being somebody's water tower, you have to try and help convince your C-level executives to spend more money on defense for it. It's not the same. Mom and pop shops versus, you know, Microsoft, there are different amounts of money being spent. Mom and pop shops, small, let's say small community banks, they may think they're below the radar. Microsoft definitely knows that they're right in the center of somebody's radar. So their funding is different. Their business focus is different. And as you are looking for jobs in this industry, it's helpful for you to understand where on that target the people that you're interviewing with rest. You know, it's helpful for you to know that, because that you will know immediately the way your CISO has to talk to the C-level executives. More money just has to be spent. You know, sorry, but there's a business reason why. The risk is higher. So, yep, good conversation, guys. I really appreciate it. Anything else before we go? We're finishing up. Cool. Well, I appreciate the inputs. You guys were really helpful this morning. As I always tell everybody, you know, talk this place up. I even got my niece to sign up. If you see Crystal Chanel on there, that's my niece. She's great. I got a nephew on there too as well. Forgot his name. He's out in Houston, but I got a niece and a nephew that are both on this group. Talk it up. We will do people good if they participate in this. The goal is for them to get jobs that are paying better, that are more rewarding, that make you go home at night. One of the statements that I always make to myself is, when I go home at the end of the day, do I tell myself I made a difference today? To me, that's important. So in the realm of cybersecurity, if I am able to, you know, encourage people, train people, point people in a right direction, point out, you know, what maybe they should be focusing on instead, that to me means that I've helped to make this world a better place. Maybe in a very tiny way, and there may not be benefits for years, but it's something that I personally try and do every single day. So let's work on that for this group. Let's try and make this a better group, more people, broader reach, and make sure that people understand that we are indeed a positive resource for their cybersecurity aspirations. Cool. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it very much, and have a great Saturday.
Thanks, Scotty.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.